So today, let me start again. Today we're going to be talking about how to know the difference between whether your relationship is toxic or troubled. And it's amazing to me why that is so hard to know. Why we struggle to see the difference between toxic and troubled. But I know that I struggled too. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about what's the difference between the two. We end up thinking often that any kind of conflict is a problem, that somehow that we've shifted from a troubled situation to a toxic situation, but it actually isn't the issue of conflict. What happens is the inability to repair when you get into a dangerous zone. We don't know how to recover from a conflict. Toxic relationships don't know how to recover. So today, let me kind of give you a breakdown of where we're going to go on this live. We're going to cover the top symptoms of the differences between a troubled and a toxic relationship. We're going to actually take kind of what it looks like in a normal situation, what it would look like in a troubled situation, and what does it look like in a toxic situation. Then we're going to also talk about why do we end up underplaying toxic relationships and think that they're just troubled, or maybe this is even normal, because how many of us have heard that it takes two to tango? I mean, we get a lot of information that suggests that troubled or toxic relationships aren't actually abnormal, that they're actually part of just relationship dynamics. So we can talk about why we miss the severity of it. And then we're going to also talk about betrayal blindness and how that connects with our need for belonging, and why we don't see what's happening in front of us as really bad and problematic. And also, as you may have watched the recent video where I talked about how society gaslights us, we're going to also then jump into why society misses the signs that we have a toxic relationship as well. And then what to do with it, how to kind of tune in and differentiate the difference between a normal relationship, a toxic relationship, and a troubled relationship. So I'm so glad that you're here today. I'm Dr. Kerry McAvoy. I'm a retired psychologist. I have over 25 years of counseling at all sorts of levels. I actually worked at a residential treatment program. I worked an inpatient. I've been outpatient, and then I finally had a private practice for many years. So I've seen people's difficulties at lots of layers of severity, but also in lots of different settings as well. So thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very excited because the truth of the situation is that I didn't recognize that my relationship was toxic. I mean, I knew that we had problems, but if you had asked me, if you had said to me, Kerry, this is abusive, I would have looked at you like, what are you talking about? And in fact, one person in the middle of the early parts of that relationship, I think we were maybe like 6 or 8 months into the relationship. I had an older man who was a mentor of me, kind of like a writer mentor of me. And he said, Kerry, I think that what's happening here is so heavy that you can hardly like bear up under the weight of it. And I was like, what is he talking about? I mean, this is just aren't all relationships a lot of work? I really did actually think that. So thank you so much for joining me. I'm right now on TikTok. If you guys don't mind liking the page, just tap the page and giving me some likes to kind of get more people into the audience. That would be awesome. I really deeply appreciate that. And I'm just so thrilled that you guys are here, what platform you're here on, whether you're joining me from Facebook, YouTube, or TikTok. I'm so thrilled because I have a feeling there's going to be somebody in the audience today who's going to get to the end of this conversation and say, I had no idea that I was in such a toxic relationship, that I just thought that this was normal, or that maybe I was overly sensitive or expecting way too much. So I have a feeling that you're going to find out that probably what you have been mistaken as typical is not typical at all. So let's get into just how does conflict differ from normal to troubled to toxic. I'm actually going to do a comparison right now. So normal conflict, when disagreements are usually situational and they're resolvable, that's a normal type of conflict. A troubled type of conflict is where there's patterns of miscommunication and the unmet needs persist. And then when you move over to a toxic relationship, conflict becomes a tool for manipulation or control. So that's one layer of key differences. Here's another key difference. In a normal relationship, when there's been conflict, Both partners take responsibility at the time or at times. So they alternate, they take accountability, it's resolvable, or they even like own their part of what went wrong. But that's what happens in a normal conflict situation. In a troubled situation, one or both people struggle to take accountability consistently. So in a troubled, there's inconsistent accountability on one or both people's part. In a toxic relationship, one partner will deflect blame, will gaslight, or project constantly. So that's what happens when a normal conflict around accountability. In conflict around emotional safety, in a normal relationship, emotional safety is genuinely intact. So you walk away generally feeling heard and safe enough, secure enough, you don't get scared. In a troubled relationship, emotional safety is fragile or inconsistent. And in a toxic relationship, there's persistent fear, confusion, or self doubt. So, in conflict around emotional safety, that's how they differ. Now, here's how repair differs. So, making up or getting okay with each other at a after conflict. In a normal situation, there is real effort to come together after the conflict. There's real effort to come together. In a troubled situation, apologies may happen, but it doesn't usually lead to meaningful change. So apologies may happen, but there's not meaningful change. In a toxic relationship, apologies are weaponized or outright absent, and the cycles just repeat. So that's what happens around repair in a conflict. Around the topic of what's in issue, what's the conflict about, in a normal relationship, the conflict stays focused on the issue. So the conflict stays, so whatever you're having a problem with, that stays the topic of the conversation. If you're struggling over carpooling, you'll keep talking about carpooling. If you're struggling about who's taking the kids to the next event, you'll keep talking about who's taking the kids to the next event. In a troubled situation or a troubled relationship, conflict gets personal and it escalates quickly. It gets personal and escalates quickly. In a toxic relationship, conflict involves character attacks, threats, or humiliation. So that's how we manage the topic. Okay, how you manage conflict around how you feel respected and valued as a person. In a normal conflict, partners feel respected and cared for. In a troubled relationship, the connection feels unstable or conditional. And in a toxic relationship, one partner ends up feeling emotionally starved, disrespected, or dehumanized. That's what happens around how you treat self-respect, how you treat intensity during a conflict. In a normal relationship, emotional intensity is temporary. In a troubled relationship, emotional distress becomes chronic. And in a toxic relationship, there's emotional chaos or trauma. So that's how conflict looks different. So again, I want to say this from the top. Conflict in itself is not a problem. It's not that you guys have disagreements. It's what you do around the disagreements that really makes the big difference. And in fact, I know on YouTube right now, you guys are being shared about my book. So if you'd like to hear what actually happened to me, you want a like personal look at how does a trouble or toxic relationship, and I thought it was just difficult. I didn't know it was toxic. I didn't know I was in an abusive relationship. But if you want to know what it looks like, be sure to check out my story called Love You More. It's a memoir. I want to tell you guys, it's a graphic look. It's a raw look of what happened in the inside of my relationship. And I do that on purpose. I tell you the real story because I want you to know that nobody's above it. Even myself as a psychologist, that we all get trapped in these relationships and that it can happen to anybody. I knew about healthiness and yet I really didn't actually know when it's happening to me. I really want you not to feel alone. I want you not to feel shame. So it begs the question, why do we not recognize toxicity? How do we not know that we're in a troubled or even a toxic relationship? And by the way, I started promoting it this week. I have a big gift for you all. It's a mini course. So for free, it's an 8-lesson, 4-module mini course that I just give away. and it's based upon your biggest relationship trouble. So if you are struggling with a romantic relationship, or you're struggling with a friendship, or maybe it's a work relationship or family, it actually will assign you to the right track at the right level of difficulty that you're handling. So if you're looking for free help, like, you really want to help somebody kind of give you some things to think about, some reflection questions, some journal points, all this type of stuff, it's for free. It's a survey called Toxic or Troubled, and it actually will then assign you to the right mini course that's just for you and around the issues that you're dealing with. So it's my gift to you guys. It's my way of saying thank you so much for being an amazing follower of mine. I really want you guys to have something that's helpful, that you can actually work through and work on your own. So be sure to take the Toxic or Troubled survey. It's a link into my bio, but it's also, I've been promoting it everywhere. And I know that on YouTube, we'll be putting the survey link up for you periodically throughout this live. So let's talk about why we miss the severity of issues. The first reason is just because it happens over time. What we tend to do is we focus on the recent occurrence. We don't see the pattern. And lately you may be hearing that across many platforms. We're talking about, look at the pattern. Notice what's happening if as a reoccurrence in this relationship. Notice how this is something that just comes up. We tend to, though, not only do we miss the pattern over time, we often explain away the difficulty based on state, not on a trait. For example, we'll say, well, they just had a bad day at work, or, they were really hungry and there was no food on the table, and that's why they came home really cross. Or, how they get when they get ready to visit their mom or their family. We usually just sort of explain it away as a kind of a temporary emotional state driven situation, like, well, they just didn't sleep well last night. Instead, we miss the fact that this reoccurs on a regular basis, and that what makes the difference is the reoccurrence of it. The second is that we get used to feeling bad. We get used to feeling like anxious or confused or inadequate. It just starts to feel like normal. We say to ourselves, well, this is what relationships are like, or no relationship is perfect. We don't recognize the fact that there's a chronic identity erosion, that you're starting to not recognize yourself. You're starting to feel really foggy and even unsure about what you believe or who you are. So you start to not see its impact on you. So you'll start to say to yourself, well, I used to be really a high functioning person, or I really had it all together, but lately I'm just letting stuff slip. So we won't see the way that it's affecting our sense of self. The reason is because also, number three, there's a shift in safety. So we often miss low conflict, like for peace. Like, we don't fight much, but we don't recognize the fact that we're not fighting because you're not bringing things up. Like, how many times have you guys started to actively say to yourself, this just isn't worth it. I don't want to make a big deal out of this. And if I bring it up, I know what's going to happen, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm just not going to say anything. I know that I actively did that I was not talking about things as a way to avoid the difficulty because I just didn't want another issue. So I just didn't bring it up. So you recognize the fact that you're stuffing stuff, that you're using silence as a way to protect peace. You're feeling chronically like intimidated by this guy. Thank you so much, guys, for the gifts. I really appreciate that, Leslie. That you really you're feeling intimidated. So you're not bringing up issues. There's a lack of conflict, not because there's a lack of conflict. There's a lack of conflict because you're stuffing a lot of things. So that's the third reason. The fourth reason is power imbalances. We tend to miss the fact who actually holds the power in the relationship. Here's a really quick test. It's the one who wants the relationship the most, the one who desires closeness the most, the one who makes most of the efforts to keep the relationship together or well. It's the one who wants the relationship is the one who has the least amount of power. We often miss that the person who has the most power rarely initiates repair, rarely always expects you to meet their needs first, and kind of dangles over top of the relationship the idea that if you don't give them what they want, they're going to exit the relationship. You sense this fear or this threat of abandonment, so that you just start to then do less, say less, give in more. And as a result, you start to carry more of the emotional weight, more of the emotional labor, as the imbalance of power between the two of you gets even more severe. Yeah, at the thank you for saying that. Yeah, if you guys hold and wait at the last 15 minutes at 4:45 my time, maybe if you're in Pacific time, it would be 2:45, in Mountain time 3:45, and in Eastern time 5:45. I will take your questions. I know right now I'm not taking your questions, but I will address your questions at 40 in a half an hour from now, or maybe even earlier if I get done before then. So you miss the power imbalances that there's been a shift. Now, the fifth reason is that it's impacted your nervous system and that you are chronically in a state of fight or flight. And you don't recognize the fact that you're in survival mode, that you are feeling chronically shut down, highly anxious, you're struggling with sleep, that you're numbing a lot, checking out of what you're feeling, you're detaching. And that this is actually an activated, dysregulated state that's harmful and that shouldn't be sustainable. It shouldn't be happening to you because it's leading to exhaustion. So you just kind of miss because it becomes normal. I'll tell you, I felt it in my body. I was having like chronic jaw pain. I was having a lot of GI symptoms. I felt it, but I didn't really register the fact that something was wrong. I just thought it was like, oh, we're going through a lot. I would kind of explain it to what's happening in the greater picture. I'd say, well, we're trying to do this or that, or this new thing's happening, and this is why I'm going through this. I wouldn't say, yeah, he's upsetting me. He's making me feel unsafe. And I know I'm using he because in my case it was my ex-husband, but it may be a woman in your case. Maybe it's your mother, maybe it's a girlfriend, maybe it's your wife, but you'll kind of like write it off as this is what happens to couples. This is just what we go through. So, why do we miss the signs? Well, there are a couple of reasons why we miss the signs. One is because of betrayal blindness, and I really want to describe that. But the other reason is because we have this really deep need for connection. We're hardwired for belonging. And as a result of that, we'll do about anything in order to make something work. So, let's first jump into betrayal blindness. Jennifer Freed wrote the book Blind to Betrayal, and she's the one that actually coined the term betrayal blindness. And she meant it literally. She's trying to describe a way of not seeing, as if you're blind to certain truths because they feel too dangerous to recognize. So, usually, this happens when we're in a relationship with somebody that we depend on. And we unconsciously block out the severity of the harmful behavior in order to preserve the relationship or to preserve our safety or our stability. There was a great example in her book, Blind to Betrayal, and I highly recommend it. It's an awesome book. In her story, in her book Blind to Betrayal, she describes how this woman's husband was picked up for illicit behavior with minors. And when the police department, the detectives went through the house to collect evidence, they found like literature out on the center table, in her living room that was inappropriate. And they actually showed her this literature and said, "What do you think of this?" Just kind of curious about why she'd have this literature out and why she wasn't more bothered by it. And the detective described watching her glance through the pages of the inappropriate images, and he said it looked like her eyes glazed over, like she wasn't registering what she was seeing. Then they came back and they interviewed her several months later and again said, "What about that literature was left out right in your middle of your living room?" And she said, "I don't know why. I mean, it was inappropriate. I don't know why I didn't see that. I didn't see it. I don't know what was wrong with me that I didn't see it." So what happens is literally the mind, in an effort for survival, blanks it out and says, "You know what? You can't handle this. And I'm just going to like pretend you're not seeing this." And it moves it out of consciousness in a way, and you literally become blind to what you're seeing. There were so many incidences, and if you read Love You More, you'll see them, where I should have known. I mean, if I told you the story of something like, we met up in a city to pick up some paperwork, official paperwork. He goes out late at night to see his son, who's working late and closing at a restaurant, and I don't. He's not home by 3 a.m. and I'm calling all around, and I'm trying to decide when I start to call the police department or the hospitals to see which one he's in, to see if something bad happened to him. And I call, and why did I not call his number? I didn't call his number. I texted him a couple times, to which he didn't respond, but I didn't call his number. One, because he'd made it clear, "You don't call me, I call you." In fact, he even said, if there's ever, I just forgot this until now. He ever said, "If we ever get cut off in a phone call, I'm to call you back." And he would even quiz me to make sure I understood the rule. "I'm to call you back." I wasn't to call him. And so that night, I felt the urge. I wasn't to call him. So I finally like made myself call him at 3 a.m. And the first time the phone picked up and he hung up. I thought that was really weird, but someone picked up. So I called him again and then he picked up and he said, "Oh, I'm running late. We had a really late night. I'm on my way home right now." Okay, if I told you that story, you guys would all look at me and say, "No, he didn't meet up with his son. Kerry, what were you thinking? He met up with somebody." But do you know that that thought never crossed my mind? It never crossed my mind. And it wasn't until I was confronted by the fact that he really had been with somebody, because the woman who he was with contacted me our last night of our delayed honeymoon to say, "I've been dating your husband for the past 3 months." And she even said, "That phone call, was that phone call at 3 a.m. you?" She actually referenced the situation. So I know it was her that he was with. So that's an example of like how my mind just like literally put it out of my mind. I couldn't, like, I just didn't believe people did that to each other. I just didn't believe he would do that to me. So what happens is we often make excuses for troubling behaviors. We minimize how bad it hurt, or we get really hyper focused on our flaws instead of seeing their pattern. Did you hear what I just said? I made it me. I made it like, I'm really sensitive. A more together person would have like been okay and would have just, been cool and wouldn't have checked up on him. I'm being really paranoid. No, I wasn't. I wasn't paranoid. I was rightly suspicious. By the way, we had an early morning event that we're going to go to, and I'm thinking, why would he be out late when he's got to do this event? It's so wild. Yeah, the name of the book is called Blind to Betrayal by Jennifer Freed. It's the name of the book that talks about betrayal blindness. But the other reason that we miss these things is the deep human need for belonging. We are wired for connection and we will do almost anything to avoid abandonment. There's a great book called The General Theory of Love. The General Theory of Love. I read it years ago. It's written by a bunch of researchers, and they kind of collect the research on our need for belonging, which is about love. It's not about romantic love, it's about connection, how we're wired for connection. One of the things it talks about in that book that just blew me away, that I really didn't register or know very well, is that, do you know that babies' heart rate and body temperature regulates when they're held? And that's why that skin on skin contact is so important, especially with preemies. That so when you pick up a newborn who's just like dysregulated, and you hold them really close and they feel the warmth of your skin, maybe they hear your sound of your heartbeat and they smell you and your body and they feel that connection, they're being regulated. That's co-regulation that's happening. I'm sure you're being regulated too by the experience. We are just wired for connection. It actually affects us physiologically when we feel a sense of belonging. So when you're in that relationship, I want so much for you not to feel shame and not to blame yourself, because you want to be in a connection. Think of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The first one is immediate safety, like out of the weather and out of the like whatever it is. Like if you're dropped off naked, in a tundra, your first inclination is find fire, find shelter, get covered. The next is food and water. It's really important for you to actually not starve and to have something to drink, get hydrated. But the absolute next, so think about it, physical needs must get met first. But the absolute need met next is your sense of belonging. Your sense of belonging is absolutely next. It will trump everything else. You can't focus on yourself until you feel like you're connected to other people. So you are not too sensitive for wanting this relationship. You were not wrong for making all the efforts that you did to keep the relationship the way that you did. And unfortunately, this sense of desire for belonging often silences us to keep the peace. We often will overfunction in order to earn love or approval. It also means we end up allowing ourselves to stay confused because we know seeking clarity may actually be letting go of some form of letting go. In fact, I was talking to Dr. Robin Stern for one of the podcast episodes, Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. And she talked about one of the reasons that, and this was painful. I did not like hearing this, but one of the reasons that gaslighting works so well is because the gaslighter is asking you to relinquish your perception, your emotions, or your reality. And we know that if we don't do it, they're threatening to disconnect from us and abandon the relationship. So, in order to stay connected, we then go along with the gaslighting in order to preserve the connection with the one who's gaslighting us. Fatima, I know you didn't write those books down. Oh, the first one's called Blind to Betrayal. The second one's called The General Theory of Love. The General Theory of Love. I wish I had both of them to show you. I tend to buy digital books, so I can't like pick them up and show you. But the first one's Blind to Betrayal, and the second one's The General Theory of Love. If you're more interested on learning about gaslighting, a really great one is to find Robin Stern's book called The Gaslight Effect. She also has a podcast by the same name, The Gaslight Effect. Awesome books. I can't recommend them enough. And if you want to read my story, it's called Love You More. And the reason I call that was even that was gaslighting, is because he wouldn't say I love you to me. He wouldn't say that to me. So I generally would, what I would typically do is I'd say, I love you. And then he'd say, love you more. And then I'd say, no, I love you more. And then he goes, no, I love you more. And that's the game we'd play. But unfortunately, okay, think about that. This is a person who didn't really love me. And the reason they were playing that game with me was to avoid the issue of making me feel loved. He gamified it every single time. He gamified it. And so it was so painful when that happened. I just really want to let you guys know that that you're not too much for wanting that. It's normal to want belonging. There's nothing pathological about you for wanting to really save the relationship. And the other thing, I just heard this from Lynn Strathy. You guys know sometimes she drops in our lives. She's known as the Echo Chamber 2024 on Instagram. That she commented on the fact that we also know that leaving a relationship takes so much work that sometimes it just is easier not to disrupt our life, just to pretend that it's okay. So all of this, unfortunately, numbs our awareness. It creates pressure on us to adapt to the dysfunction. But so that even though you're suffering, you'll often tell yourself, well, all relationships are hard, or it's just probably my trauma, or at least I'm not alone. But what happens when you're doing that is you're underestimating the severity and you stay in survival mode longer than you should, unfortunately. But there's another dynamic that happens that's also very painful and harmful, and that is the society around us gaslights as well. So our society around us gaslights as well. This was noted in the book called The Mask of Sanity by Harvey Cleckley. I know I'm giving you a lot of books today. Harvey Cleckley. He described it about psychopathy in depth, and he talks about dangerous people who often appear completely normal, even charming on the surface. So he wrote this book to explain the Mask of Sanity, how psychological masks hide profound deficits of empathy, conscience, and emotional depth. In it, he says, to the outside world, these people appear competent, charismatic, even generous, but behind closed doors, their behavior is cold, manipulative, and cruel. So what happens, and you all know it, how it happens, is that you start to talk about the truth of what's happening in your relationship, and you're told that you're exaggerating. You're told that there's probably another side. I don't know how many times I've heard that. I tell a horrible story, and somebody will say to me, well, I'd like to hear the other person's side, as if the audience, the society is acting like a juror and going to pick which side's the more truthful one, their side or my side. So they often dismiss survivors' accounts as exaggerations. They blame both parties equally, and they excuse harmful behavior because the person seems from the outside as successful or really well liked. I was thinking about when I was about this subject when I actually created the video about it, the Dirty John season 2, which is the Dan and Betty Broderick story. And I don't know how much you know that story, but it was horrible. I mean, she ended up kind of being ultimate form of reactive abuse where she took his life. So that's an example of where nobody believed her. And it just happened this last week. I don't know how much you guys have been watching about how much you've been watching. Sorry, I'm just getting a message that just came in. The case that just happened of the 3 little girls that the mom had told everybody under the sun, this guy is not safe, this guy's not safe, this guy's not safe. And nobody listened, and he was allowed to have visits with them. And now they're not with us. And that just happened about 6 days ago. I think it was in Washington State, comes to my mind. I know if you put it into Google and ask about the 3 girls that are no longer with us, it will tell you where it just happened, but it just happened this week. So, but why? Why do we do that? Because unfortunately, we mistaken nice people, nice appearing people as or successful people like the Dan Brodericks of the world as good people. You know, we end up thinking there's something like bad people would always look bad, always behave inappropriately, but that's not the truth. It doesn't matter what the public persona is. And anybody who's been in a narcissistic relationship knows that toxic people are all about public persona. They're about image management. They're very good at misleading, very much misleading the environment. And I don't know why on YouTube my Wi-Fi's dragging, because I'm on Ethernet, so it's as fast as it can possibly go. I don't know what's happening, but that's really so. I feel bad that it's not being good today. I don't know why it's not behaving today. So unfortunately, one of the things that's going to happen is that you're going to experience troubling dynamics that society is not going to understand or believe, because they'll see somebody who has friends, who seems emotionally intelligent or holds a steady job, that somehow that means that person is safe, or that means they have a capacity for intimacy, which explains why survivors often feel so invisible and frequently disbelieved, because their abuser is wearing a public mask and everybody buys this mask. So, oh, good. I'm glad my stream is fine. So I want to warn you about that, because so many times we try to like get help by talking about it, and then we end up feeling like there's another layer of invalidation that we get from the world around us that sort of shuts us down and makes us feel really, really terrible. So I just want to affirm that it's important for you to know who you're sharing what's happening, because this person, there may be a lot of pressure on not seeing the troubling parts of this person. People, your environment may not want to recognize their dangerousness. So how do we know how to determine if it's toxic or troubled, or maybe it's really us? How do we know that? Well, I want you to start really, first of all, tuning in and paying better attention to your gut. I want you to start to sense the tension, sense the confusion, sense the exhaustion. This is not in your head. This is not in your head. Even if you can't explain it, your nervous system is picking up on patterns that something here is not safe or something here is not sustainable. So instead of pushing it away, I want you to start to be curious with yourself. That's the important part. Be curious. And I know curiosity is hard, because we often want to jump in with criticalness or a decision, like we need to like do something. But I want you just for now, be curious and ask yourself these questions. How do I feel about myself when I'm with this person? Do I feel grounded, worthy, seen? Or do I often feel not good enough, confused, or small? Because a healthy relationship is going to strengthen your self-concept, not erode it. Secondly, is there room in this relationship for my feelings, needs, and voice? Can I speak disappointment or express a boundary around something without having it turn into a major issue? Do I feel like my emotions are taken seriously? Because if you're always swallowing what you're going through, what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, or your truth just to keep the peace, then you're starving yourself in this relationship. Number 3, do repairs happen after there's a conflict, or do we just reset? Do we talk things through? Are we learning about each other? Is there growth? Or does everything just go back to normal without any real change? Because toxic relationships often cycle through harm, fake peace, more harm, more fake peace, more harm, more fake peace. Number 4, do I feel safe being honest? Now, I want you to hear me. Safety doesn't mean you don't bring anything up. Safety doesn't mean there's no fights. Safety doesn't mean that you're not being punished for being real. I want you to, can you actually bring conflict up in this relationship? Or do you find yourself bracing yourself, worrying about how they're going to react to something that's hard? I actually had to literally like practice it in my head, role play it several times, imagine what would happen, then wait for the right moment, and then try to squeak out whatever it was that I wanted to bring this up to this person before I could say anything. And then often then it was like, oh, do we have to make everything a big deal? Or why does it always have to be about you? I mean, it was so not safe to bring up stuff. So if honesty feels risky, then alrighty, guys, this is not a good dynamic. There's not safety in a relationship where you can't bring up issues. Number 5, am I the only one who's trying to make this work? Are you the only one who initiates making up? Are you the one who tends to apologize even when you're not the one who did anything wrong? Are you the one who's always making all the emotional effort? Man, I can relate to that one. I did all of that. Love can't survive in a one-sided system, and if you're the glue, then it's not mutual. And if I was to if someone I loved was exactly in this same kind of situation as I am right now, would I want that for them? Sometimes the best way for us to find clarity is to ask ourselves, to imagine someone we deeply care about, like our best friend, or maybe one of our kids in a similar situation, and wonder if this would be okay for them. I know for me, that was exactly, some of you guys talk about, what is it going to take for me to leave? What truth do I have to get through my head for me to know this is really, really bad? And by the way, I don't always think leaving is the only answer. So please don't hear that I'm pushing for you leaving necessarily. But I still will forget. I was in a pool and trying to have a good time. We were on vacation, and he was fighting with a chair who'd gotten stuck, entrenched in like rocks from a lot of rain. So it kind of had rocks kind of in the ground moved over it. So he was fighting with the bottom of this chair trying to get it unstuck. And he was swearing at the chair. And then he looked over at me and he said, "This is what's wrong with you. You don't think," he said. "You don't think about the most basic things. When you picked this place," by the way, I had to pick the place. He was totally uninvolved in making any of the plans. He said, "You didn't think about whether or not I had a big enough microwave. You didn't even know if I had a complete set of silverware or whether we could have parked with a garage. You didn't think. That's the problem with you. You don't think." And I sat there and I looked at him and I thought, would I be okay if one of my son's wives talked to them like this? Can I imagine that? And I thought, I would not be okay with this conversation. I would be really upset and deeply concerned about my son or sons if they picked somebody like this and this person was treating them this way. It was not okay. And then I asked myself, why do you think it's okay for you? What makes you tolerant or with big enough shoulders that somehow that you can put up with this? And I thought, I don't have to have big shoulders. I don't need to put up with this. Why am I thinking that I should be bigger than this? I don't need to be bigger than this. And I'll tell you, that was the start of the end for me. That's what Dr. Ramani calls the breaking shelf moment. That was my breaking shelf moment. I just thought, I don't need this. I don't deserve this. This was something I would never want for any of my kids. So that comes back to, I really want to help you see your relationship with new eyes, whatever kind of struggle you're having. And like I said, there's a survey that will actually take your specific relationship, take the specific relationship you're struggling with, and then measure the severity. Is it a mild issue you're still dealing with, more a moderate issue, or are you in a really desperate, dire straits? And then based on your results, it will assign you to the right level of the mini course. There's a mini course for every level, specifically for you. So I'd love you to take the survey called Toxic or Troubled as a way for you to get that free mini course as a gift from me. And I tell you, it's a 8-lesson mini course filled with like insights, some education, some deep reflective questions, and some journal prompts just to help you figure out what's going on so you can pinpoint what's happening in this relationship. It puts you in one of 9 custom healing tracks along with videos, practical tools, and reflective prompts so that you can be able to help you start to find clarity and confidence, not just self-doubt. Guys, there is no got you in this offering. This is a free, full mini course for you. You will get full access to complete it. There's no money asked all the way through this. It's just my gift to you as a way to help you. If you'd like the handout that comes with it, then I make an offer for you to try the Toxic Free Relationship Club for 2 weeks on me. Try it for 2 weeks, and then I give you the first month off, half off. So if you want to like try it for 6 weeks, you can have all of that for normally it's $75 a month. You get it for $35 for 6 weeks. And but that's if you want the handout and if you want to try the club. But the lessons, the whole mini course is a gift from me. So here's the things that I don't want you to miss. I don't want you to miss chronic dis-ease where you start to feel like you're not yourself. I want you not to dismiss you trying to value peace over your truth. I don't want you to say that we all feel stressed or all relationships are hard, because that's actually not true. This is often what your body is telling you, a warning that something's unsafe in this relationship. I don't want you to keep overthinking everything that you say. I don't want you to get in a habit of replaying conversations and try to strategize how to bring something up without upsetting the other person. I don't want you feeling anxious over small conversations, because healthy relationships shouldn't require a performance. So if you're stuck in hypervigilant communication mode, that's a sign that something is off. Number 3, I don't want you to self-blame and spiral into, this is my trauma. No, you're not having problems because of your trauma. I'm sure it's not helping, but it's not the reason that you're not the problem. If you're apologizing too often or you feel like you can't do anything right, that's a sign that you're in a relationship that chronically leaves you feeling unsafe. And you know what? You can read all the books in the world, you can take all the quizzes in the world, you can do all the emotional work, but it isn't going to make an unsafe relationship safer. All right, this was a lot, you guys. This is the start of my summer series. Next week, I've got a whole 10-week plan for you because I'm taking the hiatus of the summer off from the podcast. So just so you know, there's no podcast episodes for the summer. I'll be back on August 18th. But in the meantime, over the summer, I actually have content. And if you still are a subscriber, you're going to notice that on YouTube as well as Substack, I have been recording audio stories for you. I have been sharing a little bit of behind the scene of what happened to me and what I learned about myself through what I went through. So this week, if you sign up as a paid subscriber, you get the audio file of I thought we were healing until it happened. And on Substack, it's an article about how to know the difference between toxic or troubled. Next week, we're going to talk about, so if you join me next week at 4 o'clock on Tuesday, we're going to be talking about why you're so exhausted all the time, how the body is often the first to know, and why we tend to miss the symptoms and signs that something is off that leads to our exhaustion. And then the week after that, we're going to talk about why you're explaining too much, why you tend to go out of the way and you say all the things that you're saying. So I want you to, I can't wait to have you guys come back and for us to deal with these. And because it's really, I'm excited about that. I'm excited about being here and talking about these topics with you. All right. So this is the time where I turn it over to you to talk about what it is that you want to talk about. What are your top questions? So I'm going to be able to get to where I can see the screen with your questions. Yeah, so how to fix or cope with someone being enraged by a toxic person because you need to bring things up that are problematic. Yeah, that's the problem. And I know that's what you're trying to prevent by not bringing up topics. You don't bring them up because you don't want to deal with their rage. It's not about managing their rage. It's about managing your response to their rage. I want you to flip it and think about it from a different perspective. We tend to try to manage our environment as a way to stay safe instead of managing what we're going to do about our unsafe environment. Did you catch that shift? So I want you to start thinking about what are you going to do about your unsafe environment? It may mean that you say to yourself, you know what, I'm just going to say, hey, this conversation is starting to make me feel uncomfortable. I'm going to stop it. I'm going to leave the room and come back when things are quieter. I will come back. I'll even check back in an hour, but this is starting to make me feel not good right now. So it's really about your internal boundaries with yourself that you're going to start to implement as a way to keep yourself safer. That's a big rule. How do you move away from self-blame to self-compassion? That's hard. I felt a lot of blame for myself as well. It's partly because it feels like a failure. And we often, in a lot of ways, see ourselves responsible for picking the partner that we did. Like, I should have known better. I missed the red flags. Or you even get that. People will say to you, well, what red flags did you miss? So there's a lot of attachment to that it's somehow our fault that we don't see these signs. And a way through it is to remind yourself that these individuals are really good at hiding. They're extraordinarily good at deceiving us and presenting. Remember, they're all about image management. So it's really, they're very good at selling you on the person that they want you to think that they are instead of really showing you who they really are. And then once they wait until you're into the relationship to really sort of spring the rest of the truth and say, oh yeah, this is who I really am. And it's at that point that you end up, it's not easy to leave. And we often don't leave because it's so very difficult to leave. So part of it is just giving yourself if you notice what I've been doing is putting into context, seeing it from a different perspective is a really great way to help you see yourself in a different way, to help you feel more self-compassion for yourself. That often helps a lot. What about the person who stays calm and acts like what you're going through is not a big deal? Well, that's another form of it's actually a form of, I want to say gaslighting, but it probably is not the right word. It's probably not gaslighting, but it's a really good way to hold power. I want you to think, Gemini, in that moment, that person is taking power back by minimizing the impactfulness of what's happening. Because a normal relationship or a normal situation would have said, yeah, that's really upsetting, and there would be a truthfulness about that. So when somebody does that to you, they act calm and act like you're overreacting. That's a way for them to disempower you, but also to minimize your issue and invalidate your feelings. I think the way to deal with it in that moment is to recognize that they're doing this as a form of manipulation, as a way to hurt you, and see it for what it is. That's a way for you to revalidate yourself in the thick of it so that you don't end up being triggered, but see it for the toxic measure that it really actually is. So I'm trying to find another question. Yeah. You said there's a question above. Okay, let me see if I can go higher up. Actually, I don't see any higher. I must have missed it then. What does it mean when you can't cry anymore? Often we stop crying or feeling a whole lot of anything. It's when either we're dissociating or we're emotionally numbing. And that's a sign that you have learned that even being emotional is dangerous. So you're now shutting down your emotions as just a way to survive. I think it signals that you are stifling yourself. You're practicing extreme form of silence in all sorts of directions. And that means that, again, think back to what I was talking about signs of a toxic relationship. That means there's no accountability. There's no safety in this relationship. There's going to be no repair. So your only measure of ability to kind of manage it is simply to just check out altogether. So creating ways on TikTok says, my family members like to do trauma Olympics and project ableism. Can you say more what you mean by that? I don't want to misunderstand you. I kind of think that they're like competing about whose problem's the greatest. Is that sort of what they're doing? They're like, who has it the worst? When you're seeing that kind of competitiveness, and I'm going to assume I've got it right. I don't know that I do, but I'm going to just act on that for a moment. When you see that level of competitiveness, this really isn't even, there's no safety in there in that kind of a situation. This is a family that just sees every opportunity as a way for showmanship, as a way to sort of updo somebody. And I don't find that a whole lot of safety in that. Yeah, it's probably because I could make lots of guesses why they do it. It doesn't really matter why they do it. It really matters what you're going to do about it. But I would know one thing I would do in such a situation. I would stop sharing my difficulties, because there's no space for the difficulties. You're just going to be showed up if you say something. So those are that's a for instance that I would just prefer to opt out and just listen respectfully, but not contribute to it. But it means that you're giving up a support system. That's what it means. You're saying to yourself, these people don't show up for me, and I'm going to let go of the hope of them showing up for me. Yeah, somebody else said, I don't have anyone else to be close to. That's a really hard situation, which is why I created the Toxic Free Relationship Club, because so you can meet other people who are actually going through this and you know that you're not alone. And I hope you guys have been on my platform enough to know that if you can't afford it, especially at the premier level, which I think is really the best level, please get a hold of me. Financial assistance is available to anybody who asks. So please, please don't forgo it because you can't afford it. We can make it affordable for you. Um, okay, so here's the question that was asked. PTSD, trying to have doctors force us to believe it is in our head. Can you say more about how they're trying to force you into saying it's all in your head? I hate to say this because I hate to sort of diss on my own community, my own providers, but there are a lot of providers who are not informed about narcissistic abuse, that it is traumatizing. I actually heard a creator say that that we can't say that it causes PTSD. Yes, it causes PTSD. They've actually done studies. They actually have compared people who've experienced real life like dangerous situations where they knew that they're facing something like imminently awful versus those who've gone through narcissistic abuse. The symptoms are the same. So even though if we may not feel like our actual life is in jeopardy, we still feel like our life's in jeopardy and we still develop the symptoms. So the idea that somebody would say this is in your head, all that says to me is you've met not a trauma informed clinician. And I would find that person, I wouldn't go to them. I would find somebody else instead, unfortunately. I know that's a lot of work to go find another therapist or another doctor to help you. But that's not, again, that's not a safe person. And one of the things we need to start prioritizing is our safety above all things. We really do. If somebody cannot listen to your story and value you and value what you're saying, then you need to see somebody else. Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, one of my moderators just joined and you touched me. She said the resources inside of this is so amazing. I really, really appreciate that. That means a lot. So, other questions for me today? What else do you guys want to know? And sorry, my nose is itchy today. I keep touching it. I don't mean to be, but oh, so my son said I caused him PTSD and calls me a narcissist. Do you know why? Now, how old's your son, by the way? I really want to like find out because there's a lot of misuse. In fact, I just interviewed somebody, Gary Katz. So he's going to be one of the people I'm posting his interview this fall for the he was 23, posting his interview, and he said, we're starting to call anybody that we don't like a narcissist. And we're starting to say that everything's gaslighting, and it's not all gaslighting. And yes, I have to say that there's always a pendulum swing when we start to get a new idea and really understand a new concept. And of course, we do tend to assume, as you said, creating ways and accuse people because we love labels, and it's kind of empowering to us to attach a label to somebody. But that doesn't, no, not everybody's narcissistic. Only 7% of the world, according to the latest government statistic, is narcissistic. I have a feeling that if you experienced or asked your son curiously what it is he's describing, like what is the PTSD he's referring to, because he probably hasn't been diagnosed with PTSD, it would be interesting to hear that's a great way to disarm somebody. They accuse you of something, ask them, okay, help me understand how I'm doing this to you. I really want to know. And then hear what they have to say. And then how am I behaving narcissistically or like a narcissist? You can even use their words. It doesn't mean you're agreeing with them. It just means you're practicing curiosity to hear what it is they're trying to just, oh, he told you to Google it. Okay, well, now you're telling me a whole lot about him. You're telling me that his way of brushing you off is to get insulting to you. Yeah, be passive aggressive with you. That tells me that he's being abusive to you. It's not that you're being abusive to him. I wonder, have you, by the way, Amanda, I don't know if you have known this. I actually have a little a little survey I created. And it was interesting because I gave it to one of the self-aware narcissists to take. And he said, oh, yeah, well, my score shows up just like it showed up on another, like a professional survey. He said that this is a pretty reliable test. So I would recommend that you take that test for yourself. And then I would love you to take that test as if you're answering for your son. and then see who scores more narcissistic. Because chances are, I have a feeling that you're not the narcissist here. And I'm not saying he's a narcissist either, but I am saying that he does not sound very safe. Yeah, my family operated like all they had to do was to call me a bad mom and then I would do what they want. Yeah, it's what a great form of manipulation is to paint you like you're the villain so that you try harder not to. It's a kind of a form of typecasting that Gavin de Becker in his book The Gift of Fear talks about. Well, he'll say how they'll label a very unlikable kind of intolerable label as a way to get you not to act like, as a way to manipulate you into being different. And then you'll do whatever you can to sort of resist or show everyone how you're not that label. Okay, so somebody said, I'm going to be not popular here for saying this, but honestly, I'm really struggling to trust parents that claim to be victims of their own kids. Who raised by whom? Yeah, I get your pushback, but here, let me push you back a little bit. You're implying that we have full control over all our children's characteristics and we can shape them in the perfect right direction. Is that possible? I gave birth to three boys. Sometimes it felt like my late husband was a fourth boy. Every single one of them came out with different innate ego strengths. Some were more better at judgment. Some were better at emotional expression. Some are better at delaying impulses, so just wish for impulses. And I could shape some of that. I could help them learn better skills in some direction. And some of it I couldn't. Some of it was sort of what it was. And I could try to have consequences for bad behavior or bad choices, help them learn from their bad decisions. But I ultimately couldn't make them into different people because they were born in the way that they were born. So there's a degree in which you're using sort of the idea of a tabula rasa, like everybody comes out as a blank slate. And then by behavioral conditioning, we shape people into a right direction. And I can tell you it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's not true. You can maybe curb some things and inform others. But ultimately, our kids are kind of who they are. And yeah, there are sometimes situations in which total chaos or over control will really warp things and make them go wrong. But our children are not simply the result of our parenting. They're just not. And as a parent who has three great kids, I'm glad, but I also know that I'm not totally responsible for that either. So you say, no, I'm not implying that. I'm saying you like psychopathy or narcissism is not an I'm saying that I don't know what you're saying. I'm not implying that. I'm saying psychopathy or narcissism is an innate trait, by the way. I do believe. So the question is it nurture over nature? I would say narcissism and psychopathy is nature, not nurture. And there's a lot of research coming out to support that. We used to think it was nurture, but we're coming to see it's more nature than nurture. Now, some people would say, well, it's epigenetic. So maybe it's problems with what happens in childhood. It sort of increases the risk factor. And yeah, there may be some truth to that, but and there certainly is truth to genetics, that it could be just kind of like it's being passed along certain gene lines for sure. I know that, for example, in my family, one of the things that's passed along the gene line is autism, very much so. I'm autistic. All three of my sons are autistic. So yeah, when I do believe parents can have children who have made very painful decisions and are putting them through rough situations, and they do it because they're not healthy people. But I don't blame the parent for that. I think the parent has some role in it, but they're not the whole explanation. That we're way more complex than just what our parenting is, because we're not tabula rasas. We don't come out as blank slates. If so, we would have come up with a perfect way to raise all of us. I think of, for example, The Boys from Brazil, which is I know it's a fictional work. Boys of Brazil is about what if you took Hitler's genetics and raised him and a whole bunch of boys, cloned him and raised them. Would you have them all turn out like Hitler? No, you wouldn't. They wouldn't. They would come out like lots of different ways. Okay, so there's another, why are all children narcissists who are abused by them not narcissists themselves? Exactly. Because children of narcissists, it's not because of the trauma and because genetics is not a perfect transmission. It's not a perfect transmission. So it's a high rate of transmission, but it's not perfectly transmittable. All right, you guys, this has been a really great conversation. I know, it's, by the way, MS Fog, we could have a big conversation just about that, about why, what causes genetics. And if you want to learn more about this, I highly recommend you pick out or check out Dr. Peter Salerno's work. He's on Instagram. I don't know if he's on YouTube, but pick up Peter Salerno's work. This is wonderful. I'll be back next week talking about why you're exhausted in that toxic relationship. What's happening to you physiologically that's causing the exhaustion. But thank you so much for this really great conversation today. Be sure to please check out my free gift of the mini course by taking the survey Toxic or Troubled. All right, you guys, it's amazing. I really love being with you today. This was a great discussion.